Allan, this
Hello.
is Gil. This is
Oh,
Gil here.
how are you doing, Guido? It looks like you're in the hospital.
Yeah, can you see me?
Yeah, and I can hear you very well.
No, I'm good. They are attending me very good, and I have noticed some transformation. The 29th of November,
Okay.
I not in November I noticed a transformation in the thing. So I can talk now. I can talk better.
Okay.
I need before
David,
then.
you haven't had the surgery yet, have you?
No, I
No.
had a meeting to see the doctor that is going to perform the surgery the
Yeah.
13th of December.
Okay.
Yeah.
How is everyone else? Karen, how are you doing? Recovering
Good.
from your surgery?
Yeah, I'm pretty well recovered, Allan. I have the last appointment on Tuesday for the doctor to sign me off. So I'm well. Everything's fine here.
Okay. Hamid, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. I'm sorry, I missed the last session.
Yeah.
I was traveling, so I couldn't catch it because I didn't have a connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything is fine here.
Yeah. How are you doing, Sona? Good, good. Yeah, I was actually talking with Anna last night, and Anna said that she has to drop out because her life has just got a little crazy on Sundays. She's been called into work repeatedly, and so she doesn't feel that she can make the commitment. But she's here in spirit and in heart. And Ian said he's going to join us in a little bit. Does anyone have any questions, any comments about inner work? Anything that's going on?
If I can speak about the topic you have sent on the group.
Can you hear very well? Excuse me, Dana. Can you talk a little louder?
You hear me?
A little.
Yeah, a little. I mean, you're very soft. You are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very soft, yeah.
So I was saying about the topic, know thyself, you send.
Better.
I tried to read through it. I didn't complete it. I didn't have the time to complete it, but it's just a very interesting topic, and I'm going through many aspects in this. I mean, every day, every time I'm realizing how much I'm receiving things in a wrong way, just one day before or in the past, with the past before. And it's amazing to be able to realize that, how subjective we take things.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, and I'm going through this contemplation every day.
Okay. I mean, the today is, it's something I've been focusing on for a little while. It's the nature of self-observation. This was an exercise that, I mean, I posted it in the meeting, and I will be going through it after we do some inner work. It was something that C. Daley King wrote down in terms of a meeting that he had, one of the meetings he attended, led by Alfred or AR Orage. To one of the best ways to actually begin self-observation, to begin analyzing ourselves, is to use a certain framework, a certain conceptual structure, and first apply it to someone else, someone that we know. So you think of a friend or a colleague or someone that you know, and you begin to ask yourself various questions about them. And we'll be going through this after the inner work. And when you've done that sort of, you've done the exercise with someone else, then you turn it on yourself and you use those same skills and those same questions to attempt to look at yourself from an objective perspective. So the whole issue of self-observation, becoming aware, 2 meetings ago, I talked about, Mr. Gurdjieff said it's very important to become aware it's the intellectual center, the physical center, or the emotional center operating right now. So, you know, go to the grocery store and you compare two apples. The comparison is the intellectual center. If you think of apples as opposed to Brussels sprouts, maybe you don't like Brussels sprouts, and one is pleasing and the other's displeasing, and one involves like and dislike, that's the emotional center. And the awareness of the color of the apple, the texture, that's part of the intellectual, not the intellectual, the instinctive center. And to actually reach out and pick them both up involves the moving centers. So we can exercise those facilities. And then last week I talked a bit more about the emotions and becoming aware of our own emotional temperature, trying to figure out, you know, emotionally where we are. You know, what is our dominant negative emotion? What is the next dominant negative emotion? What is the least dominant between anger, fear, and despair? And this week I'm moving, you know, into, I want to talk about AR Orage's exercise, which I believe he got from Mr. Gurdjieff, in terms of how we begin to look at ourselves as if we were another person. And we start by looking at other people and trying to analyze other people. And then when we've got it down through looking at other people, we can then begin to focus on ourselves. Just a second, I just had to turn something off there. There's Harania joining us as well. I think there was a message from Jonathan that beeped in the background. Let me just. Jonathan's in class right now, so he can't make it. So let's just begin by recognizing that we work along 3 lines of work. So we do the work for ourselves, we do the work for our fellow human beings, and we do this work for the earth herself. And then I would just like us to begin by attempting to relax our body. And Mr. Gurdjieff said it's a good idea to begin relaxation from the head down. And he said that any real kind of inner work, any real kind of self-remembering requires a degree of physical relaxation. When we are muscularly tense, when our body is tense, when we're holding on to muscles and whatever, that's actually almost like a form of physical identification. And it uses the energy that we should properly use for inner work. So just become aware of your head. And as best as you can, just try to relax your head. Try to relax the muscle in the back of your head, the occipital muscle right at the very back. Try to relax the muscles around your ears, your temple bone, your temporal muscles. Try to relax the muscles that flow from your temple bone down to your jaw, that flow from the outside of your eye down to your jaw. Try to relax the masticator muscles, that is the muscles involved in chewing, that flow from your temple and the outside of your eye down to your jaw. And try to move into your cheeks and relax your cheeks. And then try to relax your mouth, your chin, your nose, your eyes, your forehead. And again, let's just move down from the forehead, relaxing the eyebrows, relaxing the eyes, relaxing the nose, the cheeks, the lips, the chin, the jaw. And then move down into the throat and relax the front part of the throat. We've got these large, wide muscles that flow from the base of our jaw right down to our collarbone. Attempt to relax those muscles. And then move into the muscles involved in swallowing and chewing. Try to relax the throat muscles. Try to relax the vocal cords. Try to move now into the back of the neck and relax the cervical vertebrae. There are muscles that flow from one vertebrae down to the other. And then there are muscles in the back of the neck that flow from the skull down to the shoulder blades. Attempt to relax those muscles. Attempt to relax the smaller muscles a little bit deeper inside in the back of the neck, and the muscles that flow over our shoulders. And then relax the upper arms, the biceps, relaxing the lower arms. And there are actually 25, a little more than 25 muscles in the lower arms. There's an outer circle of muscles. There's an inward circle of muscles. And then there are a couple of tiny muscles between the two bones in our lower arms. Try to relax as many of them as you can. And then allow this relaxation to seep down into your hands, down into your fingers, relaxing the muscles in your hands and fingers. And then come up to the chest and relax the pectoral major and minor muscles. Relax the intercostal muscles between your ribs. Relax the various muscles involved with your lungs breathing. And your heart is a muscle. And do your best in whatever way you can to relax your heart. And then allow the relaxation to seep down into your solar plexus, relaxing the muscles in your abdomen, seeping down into your pelvis, relaxing all of the muscles from your solar plexus down to your pelvic region. And then move into your upper back and shoulder blades. And however you can, just allow yourself to relax your upper back and shoulder blades. And then move down into your middle back, your lower back, then move down into your buttocks and hips, relaxing your upper legs, so your hamstrings and thighs, relaxing your lower legs, your shins and calves, then move down into your heels, your ankles and heels, relax your heels, relax your toes, relax the top and bottom of your feet, even allow the bones in your feet to relax. And then I would like you to bring your awareness to the top of your head and then relax your body all the way down. Breathe in to the top of your head, and as you breathe out, just relax your body down. And do it again, breathing in to the top of your head and then just relaxing your body down. And I'm just going to take a sip of water and just do this, breathing your awareness to the top of your head and relaxing your body right down to the tips of your toes as you breathe out. And then we're going to do Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. And this was the primary and basic self-sensing exercise that he taught for people who were new to the work. There are more advanced exercises. We've gone through some of them. But as a vessel fills with warm, golden honey, imagine filling with sensation. So let's start with the toes and just fill with sensation in our toes. And then fill with sensation from our toes to our heels. And then fill with sensation from the bottom of our feet to the top of our feet. And then slowly allow our body to fill with sensation up through the lower part of our lower legs, the middle part of our lower legs, up to our knees, up through the lower part of our upper legs, the middle part of our upper legs, up to the top of our upper legs, our hips and our hands, and then moving up into our lower torso, our lower arms, up to our solar plexus, our midriff, our middle back, our elbows, filling with sensation from the bottom of our feet up through our chest, upper arms, upper back, all the way up to our shoulders, filling with sensation from the bottom of our feet up to our neck, the bottom of our neck, up through the middle of our neck, up to the top of our neck, and then filling with sensation all the way to the top of our head, sensing our whole body, attempting to develop the sensation of self. Now, last week, I talked about breathing and how as we breathe in, we are feeding our body, and as we breathe out, we are cleansing our body. When we consciously become aware of breathing in, and the more we do it with all three brains, so perhaps imagining breathing in sparkles of light to represent it with our head brain, and breathing out gray, foggy waste, and breathing in sparkles of light and sensing our whole body as we breathe out gray, foggy waste. And the third thing to try to do is to become aware of the feeding, the feeling that flows in when we breathe. And the easiest place for us to begin to distinguish feeling as opposed to sensing, the easiest place is in our extremities. It's in our hands and feet, our fingers and toes. It's probably the easiest in our hands and fingers. There's a different quality than sensation. You can sense your hands. You can sense the skin in your hands. You can sense the bones in your hands. But there's a different quality that arises with feeling. I've described this before as almost an atmospheric type quality that seems to flow around and down the outside of our hands. It's a different quality than sensation. And as we breathe in, we can notice this, as I said, better in our hands and fingers than anywhere else in our body. Sometimes I also describe it as an almost like shimmering, like an effervescent quality. It's once you learn to distinguish it, it becomes substantially and qualitatively different than sensing. And it's very important within this work to begin to differentiate between sensing and say the sensation of our hands and this quality of feeling that seems to flow almost like an atmosphere down around the outside of our hands. And if you pay attention to this feeling, this flow, this atmospheric quality, you will recognize that it has its own pulse. But the pulse is not the same pulse as our heartbeat. It's more like the pulse of our breath. And it flows in a much slower pulse in conjunction with our breath, because breathing and the octave of air is related to feeling, and it's related to emotions. So this is something that I can describe. I can use words to try and paint pictures of what it is, but it's something we have to develop an awareness of within ourselves. There's no way I can tell if you are properly aware of feeling. I can only do the best that I can to describe my own experience of it. The ability to be aware of, to me, it's like an atmospheric quality. It's almost like an air, but there's sort of an effervescent quality to it. There's almost a shimmering quality, if I have to use synesthesia and describe it using another sense. It's not visual, but if I had to use a visual metaphor, it would almost be a very, very soft shimmering, a soft atmospheric quality flowing down my fingers. Now, it's also very important to begin to work with the awareness of feeling, the awareness of this separate quality. And I've done some exercises where we become aware of it, hopefully flowing down into our solar plexus and down through our solar plexus into our reproductive organs as we are focusing on breathing, focusing on breath. But there's another exercise Mr. Gurdjieff has given. This exercise is also found in The Reality of Being by John de Salzman, but she didn't write The Reality of Being. It was put together by her family after she died from her notes. But she mentions that's one of the exercises that is out there in the public domain, so she didn't feel like she was giving away anything. And this ties in with something that Willem Nyland taught his students in terms of becoming aware of our limbs, and in particular the sequence of right arm, right leg, left arm, and circling around. He said that as we develop this awareness of our limbs and we circle around, we actually create, he didn't use the word vortex, but we create the conditions for us to absorb higher impressions. Now, the exercise as it was given by Mr. Gurdjieff, there were a number of slightly different variations on it, but to do our best to become aware and to differentiate between sensing, that is the sensory awareness, and feeling. And the two variations he gave were, one was as we breathe in the word I. And as we breathe in, we become aware of feeling. And as we breathe out the word am. And as we breathe out, we become aware of sensation. Now, he also gave another way to do this exercise, and with the in-breath, to breathe in the word Lord, to breathe in it as feeling, and with the out-breath, to breathe out the sensation of have mercy. So I, breathing and feeling, am, breathing out sensation, or breathing and feeling with the word Lord, and then breathing out sensation with the word or words have mercy. Now, it's slightly more complex because the way we do it is we breathe in feeling. So we breathe in the word I and that shimmering, atmospheric, different quality into our right arm, and then we breathe out the word am and sensation into our right leg. And then we breathe I in, feeling into our right leg, and we breathe am and sensation out our left leg. And then we breathe feeling with the word I into our left leg, and am with sensation out our left arm, and we circle around. Now, this is quite advanced. If you haven't properly learned to distinguish between sensation and feeling, it's a little beyond most people's capability. But I'm going to lead us in this, and if you can, when I say breathe in I, attempt to breathe in feeling, that shimmering quality, that atmospheric quality, and as I say breathe out am, attempt to breathe out sensation. So breathe in I into the right arm, and then breathe out am into the right leg. Breathing I into the right leg, breathing am out the left leg. Breathing I into the left leg and breathing am out into the left arm. Breathing I into the left arm, breathing am out the right arm. Breathing I into the right arm, breathing am out the right leg. Breathing I into the right leg, breathing am out of the left leg. Breathing I into the left leg, breathing am out the left arm. Breathing I into the left arm and breathing am out the right arm. Breathing I into the right arm, breathing am out the right leg. Breathing I into the right leg, breathing am out the left leg. Breathing I into the left leg and breathing am out the left arm. And now let's just change it. Breathe, Lord, into the left arm. Breathe, have mercy, out the right arm. Breathe, Lord, into the right arm. Breathe, have mercy, out the right leg. Breathe, Lord, into the right leg. Breathe, have mercy, out the left leg. Breathe, Lord, into the left leg. Breathe, have mercy, out the left arm. Breathe, Lord, into the left arm. Breathe, have mercy, out the right arm. Breathe, Lord, into the right arm. Breathing, have mercy, out the right leg. Breathing, Lord, into the right leg. Breathing, have mercy, out the left leg. Breathing, Lord, into the left leg. Breathing, have mercy, out the left arm. And we'll do this one more time. Breathing, Lord, into the left arm. Breathing, have mercy, out the right arm. Breathing, Lord, into the right arm. Breathing, have mercy, out the right leg. Breathing, Lord, into the right leg. Have mercy, out the left leg. Breathing, Lord, into the left leg. And have mercy, out the left arm. And by doing this, by circling around, by looping around, particularly if we can bring feeling into the process, that shimmering, atmospheric, effervescent, but very light effervescent, not like Alka-Seltzer bubbling up, a much more subtle effervescence. We actually create this vortex. We create this like whirlpool that flows around our solar plexus and allows us to digest and open to higher impressions. Now, as the earth is surrounded by an atmosphere, become aware of the atmosphere that surrounds your body. Limit it. Keep it to 1 meter, 1.5 meters, 4 to 6 feet. Become aware of the boundary of this atmosphere. Do not allow it to be dispersed. Keep it calm. Keep it tranquil. Keep it still. And in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 to 3. And when I get to 3, I want you to breathe it in. And then as you breathe out, imagine the active elements in your atmosphere that you breathed in stay within you and settle within you. So keep your atmosphere calm, still, tranquil. Become aware of the boundary of your atmosphere. Keep it contained. This is called the collected state. So we're collecting our atmosphere. We are keeping it close to us. We are keeping it contained. And then 1, 2, 3, just breathe it in. And then as we breathe out, imagine something remains. Perhaps even become aware of a quality of feeling, a certain degree of shimmering, a certain resonance, effervescent quality, atmospheric quality. And then silently repeat in your minds, may results from this exercise be transubstantiated in me for my being. And then just slowly come back into the present moment. And any comments? I think we lost Guido. Okay. Number of your microphones are off. So if you have a comment or anything you want to say.
Well, whenever I do these sort of meditating exercises with you, I feel very serene and peaceful. And you know, it's like the midday now. I just came back from work and it's a hectic day. But then when I do these exercises, these kinds of exercises, I felt of sort of more meditating, and I feel very calm and very peaceful. And I was thinking, because you have given us this exercise, the substantiated in me on YouTube, if you can record.
Yeah, you know, I'm practicing it now. So I'm practicing it with someone's not listening. I'm getting feedback from someone. I don't know if it's coming back or it's just coming through my, I don't know if it's, okay. Let me just try to figure out where this, let's see if it's coming. Okay, I'm not getting it now. Okay, I'm going to try to record this, but I'm going to practice it again with my live group on Tuesday. I want to just work through it so I get comfortable, and then I will do a similar exercise to what I've done.
You know, your voice is very distinguished as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm a hypnotherapist, which
yes.
I tend to put people into trances when I do this kind of, I just,
so I don't think that if I want to do this kind of meditation or exercise alone, it will work. I have to hear your voice. It will, otherwise it will not be the same.
Well, I mean, the goal is, you know, the recordings that I put up online are supposed to be like training wheels.
Yeah.
And they're designed to teach us how to do these exercises. Back in Mr. Gurdjieff's day, there weren't recordings. You know, you had to do them on your own. You had to do the inner work. Fortunately now with recordings, I can record them and people can listen to them enough so that they are not doing mistakes, that they are following them properly. And that was a big problem in the past. You know, someone tells someone something and they tell someone something and the messages get garbled and people end up not doing the correct exercises. Now, by putting them on YouTube, it's we can do that. Any other comments, questions?
I have another question, but it's not related to what you're saying now.
Yeah,
it's related,
sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Because you mentioned earlier that you were taught and the teachings of Mr. Gurdjieff, and a lot of what he has written and studied had to do with the Sufis.
Mm-hmm.
So it had to do a lot when I read to Ibn Arabi,
Yeah.
and Imam Ghazali and this. So, you know, the Greeks, they called the Enneagram.
Yeah.
But the Sufis, apparently they did not call it this. So
Yeah.
what did Mr. Gurdjieff say about it? Because maybe he did, from what I read about him, he never mentioned the word Enneagram.
Yeah, no, Mr. Gurdjieff used the term Enneagram. And Enneagram is simply the Greek word for 9-sided. So we have you know, an octagram is 8-sided and Enneagram is 9-sided. So it's merely the Greek description of it. It wasn't the name of it. Now, in terms of the Enneagram, the very, very first recorded instance of the Enneagram, the first time the Enneagram was revealed to the public was around 1913 by Mr. Gurdjieff. It had never appeared before Mr. Gurdjieff revealed it. The Enneagram of personality type, Oscar Chazo, I forget his name, read about it in Search of the Miraculous, and then he went into the desert and had his experiences where he claimed the Archangel Metronon came and revealed the Enneagram of personality to him. But he first came across the Enneagram in Search of the Miraculous, which was Ouspensky's book, and it had been revealed by Mr. Gurdjieff to Ouspensky. Now, subsequent to it being revealed, and subsequent to the publishing of In Search of the Miraculous, there are some Sufi orders who claim that this symbol is theirs. But I have no way of authenticating that. All I know is that the first time it was brought out into the open and openly taught was through Mr. Gurdjieff. And the first time it actually made it into print was in Search of the Miraculous. So its actual origins, what it was really called, we're not absolutely certain about. I believe it's an ancient symbol. I believe it predates the Sufis. I believe it goes back to the dawn of human civilization. And Mr. Gurdjieff called it the fundamental hieroglyph of universal language. He gave it a number of other names or descriptions of what it was. He also said it was a symbol of perpetual motion. I know that the Enneagram itself, we computers are all run with binary code, either on or off, 1 or 0. Is the way all computers, everything we're doing now, everything, it's all through on-off binary code. The Enneagram is actually the fundamental hieroglyph for a trinary code. So if you, rather than have 2 variables, if you have 3 variables, they can be in one of 6 different combinations. So you have the outer triangle, which represents the 3 variables, and then the inner hexagram.
Yeah.
Each one points to a different variable. So positive, negative equalizing, or negative equalizing positive. And there are, if we use, the notation of positive, negative, and equal signs, there are 6 possible combinations, and they're all represented by the hexagram in the Enneagram. So really, the Enneagram is a representation of a trinary code rather than a binary code. A binary code, there are 2 possibilities. In a trinary code, there are 6 possibilities.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different things about the Enneagram. I have to admit, I've done some very, very detailed work on the Enneagram years ago. I'm not ready to share the work that I've done, but it is the fundamental hieroglyph of a universal grammar rather than a universal language. If we can explore and understand human language on the Enneagram. But I have to do a lot more work. It was one of my retirement projects to really work on that. But I understand it, and I think I found a practical real-world application of the law of 3 in terms of the language we speak. In English, we're a subject, verb, object language. We've got the 3 possibilities. In Irish, they're a verb, subject, object language. In Korean, they're a subject, object, verb language. And there are these different combinations based on the law of 3. So I say, I ran there. In Irish or Hebrew, they'll say ran, I there. In Korean, they will say I there ran. These are all law of 3 phenomenon. And so the Enneagram is a very complex symbol. And this is where I actually have a problem with the Enneagram of personality types, because we have in the center the 3, the law of 3, the Trinity, so to speak, and the 6 possible combinations. And in the Enneagram of personality, they say there are 9 possible combinations. So that's where to me, it's like I see the 6 possible combinations. I don't see the 9 possible combinations, but that was what Oscar Chaz said was revealed to him by the archangel when he took mescaline, which is an entheogen. And I don't have problems with people taking mescaline or entheogen and opening to divine possibilities and divine wisdom. But it's, it's a complex symbol and it's an ancient symbol. So
when you say hieroglyphic, I'm Egyptian.
Yeah.
So it's the hieroglyphic language. So like you are now the Rosetta Stone of the Enneagram.
Yeah. Mr. Gurdjieff called it the fundamental hieroglyph of a universal language. I understand it as the fundamental hieroglyph of universal grammar. And when I use the word universal grammar, I'm speaking of it in the Noam Chomsky linguistic sense. But again, I actually have I say I have a BA in linguistics from the University of Osmosis. I mean, the University of Osmosis is, I picked it up. I was married for 20 years and my ex-wife is a professor of linguistics, and I learned linguistics at the kitchen table. And so that's why the University of Osmosis. So I've got this, I never thought I would develop an interest in linguistics, but I just was there over and over again, all our graduate students, all sorts of stuff. And I just absorbed it. And then I looked at Enneagram and I see it in the Enneagram. So, that's my comment about the Enneagram. We will plumb the Enneagram. We haven't even begun to fully understand it yet. I believe it's actually the remnants of an ancient science. And so it's been preserved, and it's been preserved in secret. But it contains secrets upon secrets upon secrets within it that have yet to be revealed, that have yet to be discerned and brought out. So the whole issue of self-observation, of becoming aware of ourself. I've mentioned before that self-observation is actually an act of mindful awareness. And what we're really trying to observe is our mechanical nature, our machine self. A machine is incapable of self-reflectivity. A machine is incapable of observing itself. So when we start to observe ourselves in that moment, we are not a machine. And what we're observing kind of disappears because we're stepping up to the level beyond the machine self. And so we almost have to hack the process. And one aspect of it is in that moment we begin self-observation, we begin to self-remember, we become mindful. It's like we take a brief instant snapshot of our state in the moment before we stepped up that one level. So that is one way to observe ourselves, but we have to self-remember tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of times in order to get a better picture of ourselves. Another good way to engage in this work of self-observation, to try and understand ourselves at the level of a machine, is through group work. People that we know, that we interact with, who can point things out about us that we wouldn't necessarily see when we're being a machine and we're behaving in a very patterned and habitual way. They can go, I'm seeing this is what you're doing, and we can learn about ourselves in that moment. This is where partnerships, marriages, relationships also help, because our partner quite often sees things about ourselves we don't see. J.G. Bennett had a real problem saying no to people. So did Thomas de Hartmann. And Mr. Gurdjieff set themselves up in situations where they were forced to confront it. For Thomas de Hartmann, they were in Tbilisi. They didn't have a lot of money. He saw this poster for some kind of dinner where they had oranges or tangerines, and he pointed it out to Mr. Gurdjieff. And Mr. Gurdjieff, I think it was with Alexander de Salzman, oh, he's inviting us out for dinner. And so, you know, Mr. Gurdjieff gets him so that he has to take them out for dinner. And then Mr. Gurdjieff buys more and more expensive things, and Thomas de Hartmann has to write a note and slip it to the waiter to run home to get money from his wife to pay for the meal. And just the agony he went through in that moment. And Mr. Gurdjieff just pretended to be oblivious to it all. And the next morning, Mr. Gurdjieff showed up at Thomas de Hartmann's place where he was staying and gave him back the money. He didn't say a word. He didn't chastise him. He wanted him to see that quality in himself. J.G. Bennett didn't quite say exactly how Mr. Gurdjieff did it with him, but J.G. Bennett said that he went back and told his wife what he had really learned about himself. And his wife said, I've been telling you that for years. So our partners can really give us insight into ourselves if we are willing to listen. And we've got to figure out where we're broken, where we are leaking energy. We've got to begin fixing ourselves at the lower story. We are 3-story beings, and as long as we are leaking energy and wasting energy through identification or negative emotions or excessive rumination and thinking, associative thinking, formatory thinking, or physical movements or lying, there are a number of very specific ways. But even these specific ways, there are so many different forms of identification, so many different ways we can lose it through negative emotions, that in order to begin to spend more time in the mindful state, to begin to awaken, we have to fix those leaks within us. So I'm just going to segue in to this, this quote, know thyself. AR Orage. He was considered one of the finest editors in the English language. He co-founded a magazine called New Age, which is one of the most influential magazines in Britain back in 1905, 1910. He was friends with George Bernard Shaw, all sorts of literary giants. He discovered Catherine Mansfield. And he was given the task of opening a group devoted to the Gurdjieff teachings in New York City in the 1920s. And this comes from a document called, not the Oragian version, but the Gospel According to Orage, written by C. Daley King. And it's a recording of what AR Orage taught in one of his group meetings in New York City, and I believe this was about 1928. Know thyself. The first of the difficulties is purely a mental one. It is no more than the delusion that we already do know ourselves. Ask any ordinary man whether he knows Mr. So-and-so, mentioning his own name, and he will tell you with a sly or cunning smile that he knows Mr. So-and-so very well. If you press the point, he will conclude with the triumphant statement, why, you see, I am so-and-so. Therefore, I know him better than anyone possibly could. No long reflection is required to appreciate the absurdity of this assertion. The smallest investigation discloses that his friends and acquaintances hold very different views about Mr. So-and-so than he does himself, and that their opinions are more likely to be correct. When confronted with a phonograph record of his voice or a moving picture of his actions, he is astonished and bewildered. For some moments, he is quite unable to recognize his own voice speaking, his own figure moving across the screen. He possesses a physical, emotional, and intellectual image of himself quite far from the facts. It is this image with which he has that acquaintance causing his confident assertion. But the image is merely subjective and false in almost every respect. Of the picture he presents even to those genuinely fond of him, he knows practically nothing at all. No tremendous sincerity is needed to assure us that in our own case is the same, although here certainly a moderate sense of humor can be present. To admit these discrepancies to ourselves is a painful business. Indeed, just to suspect them sincerely is difficult enough. To destroy a delusion may be very unpleasant, but to hold it frantically in one's grasp is true abnormality. The first step towards knowing oneself is the realized admission that one does not know. The key to this is objectivity. The possibility of knowing oneself can arise only when a man is prepared to investigate his own attributes and behavior as he would inquire into those of a stranger with impartiality and objectivity. The subtlety of this undertaking and its difficulty cannot be overstated. At every turn we may misinterpret what we see, and the constant falsity of our subjective image will distort what is plainly in front of our eyes. To see what can easily be seen is not hard, but how it is seen, that is the secret. The very first step in the method is to look upon oneself as a stranger, literally, for a stranger to oneself is what one truly is. A scientist in a laboratory investigating some hitherto unknown creature is not afraid of what he may find. His motive is a controlled curiosity. The second step is to organize the work. Haphazard attempts might turn out by chance, but we shall succeed far more quickly if a definite course is followed and a careful organization of our efforts is adopted to begin with. This, of course, is work to be undertaken professionally. Simply hearing the instructions that are given and then dreaming about them will accomplish nothing. What is to be done must be done, and no one else can do it for you. The boat is given, but only you can take yourself to your destination. Although these beginning efforts are slight indeed, compared to what shall be required later, they are difficult enough at first encounter. But you have to live with yourself, don't you? Day after day, month after month, year after year, you must live with yourself until you die. Perhaps it would be as well to know something about this stranger you live with, this Mr. Smith, who places you in such unexpected situations and predicaments. What can you not accomplish what you seek? Why can you not accomplish what you secretly wish, what you really strive for? Is it always some outside injustice that hinders you? Or may it perhaps be this fellow Smith has something to do with it? How can Smith help you to achieve what you want? That is the question. Certainly no answer to it is predictable until you know definitely and objectively about Smith. Self-knowledge will be painful. Your subjective image will omit no stratagem to deceive you and will not die meekly. But without self-knowledge, you can never be at all. To get the feeling of this thing, let's have a practice run. Take someone you know well. Now impartially describe him as if you were furnishing a report for an identification to be made. Write down his physical characteristics from memory. Consider his type, his customary behavior, his personal idiosyncrasies. Check these the next time you see him. Are his eyes really hazel, or would you now call them blue? Is that habit of scratching his ear really a habit by which the agent may recognize him, or have you given it prominence only because it annoys you? When you have the description so that you honestly believe it would serve as an identification, try it on someone else who knows him. See if that second person can put the correct name upon the description you have furnished. If you succeed in this, you have done well. Now turn upon yourself in the same way. We will suppose your name is Smith. Now let us see how recognizably you can describe Smith, as formerly you were describing Jones. Do not get lost in speculation as to who you are or what your connection with Smith may be. This is perfectly straightforward, rational, and practical. Simply consider Smith as anyone else might consider him. It is important that you write it down, for that will partially prevent more daydreaming. At once you will comprehend that you have at your disposal a far larger number of data concerning Smith than you had in regard to Jones. But do not permit this fact to sway you toward omitting the obvious. First, write down an external physical description of Smith. Check it. You can certainly do that. And don't be too sure you can afford not to. Now continue with all the items you have noticed in the case of Jones, putting down their counterpart for Smith. Let us organize this attempt more professionally and make the inquiry as specific as possible. Here is a list of 8 questions. Answers to them should be as exact as possible. 1. What does Smith like? What does Smith dislike? A. Ordinary food. B. Clothes. C. Colors. D. Occupations. E. Situations. F. People. G. Amusements. H. Company. I. Etc. Number 2. What does Smith look forward to? That is, what remains in life for Smith just in the range of possibility. Here, I'm just making an aside. So Smith might like to become president or do this or that. What does he look forward to? What would he like to do, but something that's possible? 3, what does Smith fear most about the future? 4, what would Smith like to be, to know, to do, to be? What type would he like to incarnate? To know. What field, if only one choice, but within the field of possibility of complete knowledge? To do. What primary occupation, if he were free to choose seriously? 5, what have been Smith's happiest and unhappiest moments? 6, what are Smith's personal characteristics? What does he consider strong points? 7, what things about himself does Smith dislike? A, physical, B, emotional, C, mental. And finally, 8, why is Smith afraid or reluctant to die? Do not daydream about the answers, write them down and take the trouble to do so accurately. Under food, for example, do not assume that Smith likes caviar just because it is expensive. Under situations, do not suppose that Smith likes or dislikes military formality unless he has had sufficient experience of it to be able to form a real judgment about it. Do not guess. It will be seen to consider even so short a list as these 8 questions properly and seriously will take a great deal of time and effort. However, it is scarcely a beginning. Previously, we have discussed functional types, practical, that's actually body-oriented, emotional, and intellectual. It is now necessary that one determines one's own type among these categories: practical, active or compulsive, passive, inactive or lazy. This is the moving center, man number 1. Emotional, active, optimistic or jovial, passive, pessimistic or moody. This is man number 2. Intellectual, active, constructive, passive, destructive. It makes no difference which aspect, active or passive, refers to you. You must not allow your prejudices in favor of one or another to influence your judgment. None are good or bad. Only discover for yourself which is applicable. It is not 1 hour or 1 day that counts. The criterion is what type you impersonate most of the time. For all of us fall into all 6 of the above categories some of the time. So, man number 1, the active or passive, the physical person. Man number 2, the active or passive, the emotional person. Man number 3, the active or passive, the intellectual person. So, to begin this exercise, someone that you know fairly well, and to try and use it, to help you figure out who they are so that you can begin to work with this framework, in an objective fashion. And so we practice first on someone in our life, and then we begin to apply it to ourselves. We begin to observe ourselves as if we were a stranger, as if we were making a report that someone could use and read to identify ourselves. Any comments, any questions on this? No?
I have a question here.
Okay.
Moving from the man number 1, 2, 3 to moving to man number 4, meaning that we're on our road to awakening, being, the inner observer is working more often so that we are monitoring what's happening inside, and we are balancing the intelligent and body centers. So does this be a state, or it's a bouncing back and forth and being in this awakening state?
Well, man number 4 isn't stepping into the awakened state. The awakened state is the level above. That's where in the realm of man number 5. And man number 4 is stepping, the first step towards awakening is to step into the mindful state. So we can also, with man number 1, 2, and 3, we can talk about categories.
So man 1, 2, and 3 is a 96?
Pardon?
It's the 96.
No, it's World 48. It's the mechanical realm.
Yeah. Okay.
But no one, as I was talking about the law of 3 and the inner hexagram of the Enneagram, we're not just purely a physical being or an emotional being or an intellectual being. If you're a man number 1, 2, and 3, you should also, this is where it gets a little bit more advanced. He didn't talk about it here, but are you intellectually dominant? So man number 3. And then what is the next dominant characteristic? Is it physical or is it emotional? What is the least dominant characteristic? So you could be an intellectual, emotional, physical, or you could be an intellectual, physical, emotional. These are within, man number 1, 2, and 3. They fall into one of those 6 categories, but there is a primary category. Man number 1, the dominant part is the physical center. Man number 2, the dominant part, is the emotional center. And man number 3, the dominant part, is the intellectual center. For man number 4, it's the beginning of the harmonization of these centers. And when we get into the realm of man number 4, it rather than talking about, you know, an intellectual, emotional, physical person, number 4 is more like a continuum. So there's a low 4 all the way up to a high 4, and a high 4 verges on the edge of being number 5. And this is actually more easily explained, you know, in a diagram. Just give me 1 second. Let me just pull this up. I think I may have to. Try and expand it. Okay. I mean, I've shown this diagram before. On the left, that is man number 1, 2, and 3. In the middle, and the middle is the first conscious shock, and this is the representation of full self-remembering. So this is a complete and proper, at the higher end, man number 4. And then on the right, it's man number 5. So the square on the bottom left represents man number 1, 2, or 3. And, you know, I've got the word physical, emotional, and mental, depending on which is dominant. For man number 4, we're beginning to balance these functions. And man number 4 is stepping up into the state of personal consciousness. So when we transform energy of hydrogen 48, world 48, that is a very habitual, automatic, and mechanical energy. And when we're transforming that energy, we are machines and operating at the machine level. Hydrogen 24 is, you know, in today's world, we would understand it more in terms of mindful awareness. So when I become aware of my hands, the sensation of my hands, that mindful awareness of my hands is fueled by hydrogen 24. The mindful awareness, the sensation of myself is fueled by hydrogen 24. To be mindful here and now of all of the light coming into my eyes and my eyes receiving that light is to be transforming hydrogen 24. So the big difference between man number 1, 2, and 3, their center of gravity is world 48, and they are transforming that habitual and automatic energy. Anytime we actually step up into the mindful level and become mindful of our breathing, mindful of our breath, mindful of what we can perceive, what we can see, what we can hear, mindful of what we can smell, what we can taste, even mindful of our feelings, we are actually stepping up into the realm of man number 4. But until it becomes solidified, we can slide up and down, and we can pull ourselves up and pull ourselves down. At a certain point, it's like the center of gravity of our being actually moves up. And so I've got it listed, the middle one, mindful man, but this is really man number 4. And then over on the right, conscious man is really man number 5. Man number 6 is where this is solidified. Man number 7 is actually even higher than it's represented here. But again, in terms of, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. This is where we are aiming for. But even if we become a man number 4, we still exist at the mechanical level. Even if we become a man number 5, we still exist. There's a part of our being that's at the mechanical level. The full range of organic life on this earth starts with the metals, and the next level is the minerals, and the next level is the vegetative, and then the invertebrates, and then the vertebrates. And within the vertebrates, there's a continuum, and at the top is mammals, and at the top of mammals is humans. When we step up to level number 4, we don't leave our body behind. We don't leave the minerals in our blood behind. We don't leave the vegetative part of ourself behind. It's like we're growing or building a new story on an apartment building. So even, a man number 5, even someone who's at the awakened level, still has mechanical manifestations. They still have the ability to transform energy at that level, and they still can be brought down to that level temporarily. Mr. Gurdjieff said whenever he wanted to go to sleep, that is, go to that level, he would go to the cinema and he would watch a movie, and that put him in the state of waking sleep. When he wanted to step down into the level of mindfulness, where he called that state half awake. When he was involved in the dollar business, he did things like open restaurants and get them going and selling them. And he also appraised antiques and various things to earn money. When he was out there earning money, not working with his groups, he said he was half asleep. So he had access to those levels, but rather than being limited by the fact that, the level of normal awareness at the mechanical self, we're normally wasting energy. We are not able to conserve the energy in order to step up to the next state. He would sort of step down into that state, perhaps to recharge himself, just to relax, to rest. For us, what we have to do is we have to figure out who we are. We've got to develop an objective picture of who we are. We've got to understand who we are, know thyself. And it's only when we begin to develop this comprehensive picture of who we are, who, according to Orage, Smith is. What foods does Smith like? What hobbies does he like? What inclination? To put ourselves in that objective position of objectively analyzing ourselves, to begin at that point, then we can begin to see where we are leaking energy, where we are wasting energy. We can begin to see the direction that we take in the mechanical state. Perhaps we're too much in our thoughts, perhaps we're too academic, and we're too in that imaginary mind to be present to this moment. Or perhaps we're daydreaming and we have these emotions and we're feeling very artistic or whatever. Or perhaps we're too into being a gym rat and going and working out. And by beginning to discern who we are at that level, at the mechanical level, by beginning to look at ourselves from a level of impartiality, from a level of objectivity, we begin to see our weaknesses. Generally, if you go and point out to a normal person their weaknesses, they will argue, they will fight, they will get defensive, they won't listen to you, they'll think you're an idiot. All of these things will happen because people don't want to see themselves. They don't want to recognize their nothingness, their insignificance. They don't want to think of themselves as machines. They want to think that they have free will and that they are the agents in control of their lives. And when we begin to look at ourselves from this perspective, we begin to see how habitual we are, how very much creatures of habit we are, how little we actually really truly act in the world, and how little we are really aware of ourselves acting in the world. And this is a very important realization. Mr. Gurdjieff said that no real work can begin on ourselves until we realize our own insignificance, our nothingness. As I mentioned before, I don't really like the term nothingness because it also reflects something very high. The Sufi Fana state, the Advaitin non-existent state, no thingness. There's a part of ourselves that is not a thing, that's beyond the phenomenal universe. So nothingness, there's a lower level of nothingness and there's a higher nothingness. At the lower level, probably a better word and term would be our own insignificance, our own non-entityness, how we are just machines. In order to begin to step beyond being machines, we have to become convinced that we are machines. As long as we think we have will, that we can do, that we possess a degree of internal unity, no change is possible. Why would we change? Why would we try to develop these qualities we think we have? And again, this is something Mr. Gurdjieff said, is that the hardest thing to convince people is that they don't possess unity, that they're not a united, single, indivisible self, and that they lack will or the ability to do. And so we've got to recognize our mechanicalness. We've got to begin to look at ourselves a little more objectively. And when we do, we will encounter, hopefully we will encounter what Mr. Gurdjieff called the terror of the situation. I don't like to talk about Beelzebub too much because I don't want to put, ideas in people's head. But the Society for Al-Qaldans, the mystical society that developed in Atlantis, that was started by a man by the name of Belta Kulsi, which means good cult, Belta Kulsi or Belkultasi. He began to observe himself and he began to realize something was horribly wrong about himself. And if you go and look at those chapters, Mr. Gurdjieff gives some very clear indications of how to begin the process of self-observation and what to look for. And ultimately, it should lead to what he called the terror of the situation. Just like the looking at ourselves going, wow. For myself, I came across the Gurdjieff teachings in 1981. And I had just started going out with the woman who became my fiance and then became my wife, and I was married to for 20 years. And I kind of dragged her along in it with me. She read all of the books, In Search of the Miraculous, Beelzebub Tales, Meetings with the Remarkable Men. She had a very comprehensive understanding of the teachings because I kind of forced it on her. She didn't really have a magnetic center. But it was when she was pregnant with our third child. I was talking about some of the work ideas and she looked at me and said, "You haven't changed." She became really nasty in her third trimester. And every time she was in her third trimester, I said, "I'm never going to have another child with this woman again." And then I had another child. And the third time at trimester, it would be just, and in that moment, I realized that she was right. And in that moment, and I had been a student of the teachings, I think for 13 years at that point, I realized the terror of the situation. I realized that although I could talk knowledgeably about the teachings, although I had this ability to converse about them, it was all in my mind. And that I hadn't done the real work on my being. And that was one of the most shocking moments of my life, and the terror of the situation that arose with that observation. It was just like, it's like, she's right. Fortunately, that was years ago now. And I've done a lot of work and I've really striven to see myself as I am. This is also where, and we've got to be a bit careful, where various different personality tests also help. Things like, there are online, Enneagram of personality tests. They will show us things, emotional things in particular about ourselves, emotional flavors. But anything that it shows is something we should fight against. I've mentioned this in the past. Mr. Gurdjieff said that there was an ancient science around astrology, but we've lost that science. And basically, whatever you are, I'm a Libran, so peace and harmony. So whatever I am, I should be trying to strive to experience the opposite. So I should be trying to consciously create disharmony, to be a bit more judgmental, to grow my being in the opposite fashion. This is one reason why I actually like the Myers-Briggs test, because it puts things into binary categories: introvert, extrovert, sensing or feeling, perceiving. And so whatever the quality you have, think of it as a lever. And if you're an extrovert, you have to develop introvert qualities. If you're introvert, you have to develop extrovert qualities, and you've got to begin balancing yourself so that that lever moves freely. There was, let me get to this. Something else I wanted to just briefly read before we run out of time. There has never been an occasion when I have spoken of types, and this is Mr. Gurdjieff, when some clever person has not asked this question. And the question was, well, can you tell us what these types are? And how is it you do not understand that if it could be explained, it would have been explained long ago? But the whole thing is that types and their differences cannot be defined in ordinary language. And the language in which they could be defined, you do not as yet know and will not know for a long time. It is exactly the same as with the 48 laws. Someone invariably asks whether he may not know these 48 laws, as if that were possible. Understand that you are being given everything that you can be given. With the help of what is given to you, you must find the rest. I know that I am wasting time now saying this. You still do not understand me and will not understand for a long time yet. Think of the difference between knowledge and being. These are things, there are things for the understanding of which a different being is necessary. And this is him quoted in In Search of the Miraculous. And the part I wanted to illustrate there was the part of 48 laws. When we're stuck as an introvert or as an extrovert, when we are stuck as a man number 1, 2, or 3, we are bound by 48 laws. But if, say, we've got this stuck between introversion and extroversion, or between feeling and perceiving, maybe we're a feeler rather than a perceiver or whatever, if we can develop the opposite quality, we free ourselves from one of the laws that constrains our personality. So as a Libran, seeking peace, seeking tranquility, seeking harmony, it ruled my life for many, many years to actually put myself in the position where I could tolerate and consciously create strife, was to free myself from one of the laws that bound me, to step up to the next level. So through this understanding of ourselves, and then first we have to understand ourselves. We've got to understand where these binary things are within us and how they're broken in one way, and begin to develop the opposite. And as we develop the opposite qualities, we become successively freer and freer. Mr. Gurdjieff said we must be seeking freedom. Freedom is what we should seek. And the first freedom is the freedom within ourselves. before we can become free of external constraints, we have to become free of internal constraints. And these internal constraints are the laws that bind us down. So as we develop ourselves, as we develop this objective understanding of ourselves, as we begin to free ourselves from the crystallized patterns of our personality and act with a greater degree of freedom, we are sort of moving up away from the 48 laws up into a more free realm. We've got about another 4 minutes. Any just brief questions that I can briefly address? It's a lot to take in, but
yeah, yes, we can leave 4 minutes early. It's okay.
I mean, even just recognize that when you're in your normal habitual mechanical state, you're in world 48. And when you become mindful, when you sense your breathing, when you sense your body, when you become aware of your body, you're stepping up into world 24. There are people, I've met people who had been members of the Gurdjieff Foundation, and I don't want to die like a dog. I don't want to be a machine. And I would say to them, you're only a machine until you sense the baby finger in your left hand. And the moment you sense and become mindful and conscious of the baby finger in your left hand, you are not quite so mechanical. You're beginning to step beyond that machine-like level. So this is what we have to strive to do. We have to strive to be present as fully as we can in this moment for as long as we can. But if we understand it is a direct result of energy and the conservation of energy, and related to where we are leaking energy, the whole system begins to make more sense. You know, rather than like the Buddhists, just become mindful, just become mindful, just become mindful. And it works, pulling the string from the end, eventually you become more mindful and you step up to that level. But in this system, we're working on pulling ourselves up to that level, and we're also trying to figure out what's holding ourselves back and where we're leaking that energy down at the lower level. So we're working on becoming mindful, stepping up into the state where we're sensing ourselves, and we're also working on fixing those leaks to stop identifying, stop the negative emotions, stop the associative thinking in our minds, stop the lying, stop the daydreaming and the imagination and the excessive movements in the different ways we leak this energy and we trap ourselves in the lower state. So thank you all for joining me today. You take care. Have a wonderful Sunday, the rest of today.
Thank you.
We'll meet next week. Okay, bye now.
Okay, bye-bye.